Hello everyone. I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Without another thought, his beast opened its mouth, shooting a line of fire down to the earth. At the sight of his fury, Magnum's beast released its fire as well until the entire area was engulfed in flames. Overhead, Theo, Aiken and Reese circled, their wings fanning the fire so that it spread to the surrounding area. Thick clouds of black smoke filling the sky. His beast roared with agony and victory, wings carrying it back away from the flames. She was gone. She had to be. And Ravyn was safe. Ravyn. He circled back to the trees where had left her. But she wasn't there. Her. Nor the boy she was protecting. That was a good and bad thing, as the trees in that area were quickly licked by the flames had started. Ripping through the sky, he looked for them, rage boiling as the fire in his gut begged for release. The fury of a dragon was not always able to be contained, and Steele was skating a thin line between being mindful of the humans on this realm and just burning down the entire city of Burgess if he couldn't find her. But all he could see were clouds of black smoke and more flames, glowing in victory as sweet torture gripped his soul. As light slid farther into the sky and smoke hovered over much of Burgess, the dragon flew higher over the clouds to stay out of sight as they headed back to the office. Steele touched ground and broke into a run, almost tearing the door off its hinges as he flew into the house and found his suite. He had no idea what he grabbed, just pushed his legs into pants, pulled a shirt over his head and stuffed his feet into shoes. He was soaring back through the rugged wall hallways, down the winding main staircase before his feet came to a screeching halt over the marble floor of the main entrance where Theo stood blocking his way. The Emperor was also dressed. Jeans and a button-front shirt that looked way too neat and orderly for them to have just landed. Take a breath, Theo told him, and then come and sit with me. Bullshit, I'm going to find her. She wasn't where I left her and we torched the damn place. I need to find her now. Steele's chest heaved, pain ripping through every part of his soul. Theo calmly reached out a hand to clap on Steele's shoulder. She's fine. Shola remained in one of the trucks and Ziva didn't shift. They saw when you brought her out of the rubble and got her out. Shola just sent me a message that they're on their way to the hospital. He couldn't breathe. She was bleeding. Man, I saw all that blood. It wasn't hers, Theo said. It was the guy's, and they're going to make sure he gets whatever treatment he needs. You need to come with me now. Steele didn't want to go with Theo. He wanted to get into whatever truck was parked out front and get to that hospital, to hold her one more time. But he followed the Emperor into the living room and dropped down onto the couch as if the weight of the world now rested on his shoulders. He leaned forward, propping his elbows on his knees, and dropped his head. There was nothing but quiet now. No, that was wrong. His heart beat wildly. His beast searched for her, raging because it was here and not there. He closed his eyes tight. I know what you're feeling, Theo said. You can't know. The Emperor gave a dry chuckle. Trust me, man, I definitely know. Love's a bitch, and for Drakon it's a hot ball of fire-wrapped bitch. Steele looked up to see that Theo had sat in one of the chairs across from the couch in the large living area. Your case was different. Shola always knew who and what she was. She had a job and she set out to do it. The only thing that surprised her was that the man she was supposed to kill was a vampire, Steele said dryly, recalling when Theo had fallen in love. Shit, was he in love? Theo only shook his head. Details don't even matter, my man. Not the minute emotions get involved. You were in for this woman the moment you dreamed about her. Steele narrowed his gaze. How did you know? Did Magnum tell you? Nah. I am the Emperor. Remember, it's my job to know what's going on with my clan. And don't forget my right-hand man's a watcher. Blue. Of course. He would know. That guy always seemed to know everything. Steele fell back against the couch, lifting his hands to drag down his face. I don't know what's going on. I feel so helpless. Just like I did before, when your sister died. He dropped his hands to his sides. Yeah. When Opal died. And before you say it, I know it wasn't my fault. It was the order of things. My mother explained that once Opal's beast had found its mate, her power would have multiplied. It would have been greater than any of us in the clan. He sighed. I didn't want to believe it. I just knew it was a mistake and that I'd messed up. Even all these years later. I just knew. But damn it. Man. She was my sister. I feel you. And if it were me, I would've punished myself too. But falling into the abyss for 20 years was enough. Steele, you've done your penance for something you couldn't control. Now, it's time to live your life. To move on in Opal's memory. To trust your beast selection for your mate. Theo told him pointedly. That again. Steele hadn't wanted to believe that part of being a Drakon was true. Had certainly held a grudge against Theo for falling into that trap. But he couldn't deny it any longer. He wanted Ravyn just as much as his beast always had. I thought I de-saved Ravyn, he said, by giving the Reaper another soul. I thought I de-saved her from his grasp. But there was so much more I didn't understand then. And now you've opened her eyes to who she really is. I'd say you did good here. Then why do I still feel like crap? Because you're in love with her. And for all that love is supposed to be great and life-altering, in the beginning it mostly just sucks. But it's better now you and Shola seem happy. He could say that now. Whereas before he hadn't wanted to think about what Theo and Shola had together. He hadn't cared because that type of connection wasn't for him. Now, everything was different. We're happy. We've both accepted who we are and what our purpose is together in this world, and we're content with that. You and Ravyn, you've got to settle into your personal place. Figure out what it is you're meant to do here and now, before you can find that happiness together. It's important to know that part of yourself first before you can give it to someone else. I fought grasping who I was for a very long time, like a couple 100 years. Theo joked. But when it came down to figuring out if I could live without Shola, I knew that I had to become one with myself first in order to make her happy. In your case, you've got a lot of shit to get together and now. So does Ravyn. My advice to you would be to let the dust settle. Shola's gonna keep a close eye on Ravyn from here on out, so y'all know she's safe. But take some time to figure out who and what you really are. Steele, what you can live with and what you can't. If you can offer her happiness or if your past will forever haunt you. In short, get your shit together, little bro, or you're gonna lose that woman forever. Magnum said from where he stood leaning against one of the columns at the entrance of the living room. Steele had known the minute he joined them because he'd felt his brother's steady gaze. The one that had been like a wall ready to hold him up should he fall in the last 80 years. He loved Magnum for that. And he loved Theo for being not only their leader, but also a great friend. Even with all that surrounding him, Steele knew that was still something he had to deal with. Because there would be no happiness for him if Ravyn wasn't here. He still had to deal with the Reaper. Chapter 17. 2 days later. Ravyn lay down in her bed, the same as she had the 2 nights before. She pulled the sheet and the comforter that still held his scent up to her chin, holding it there tightly as she inhaled and exhaled like a woman with a full-blown addiction. Every memory, every touch, every kiss came flooding back and she closed her eyes to the warmth that filled her body. She held on to every word Head ever said to her, whether it was bossy, or mean, or encouraging. They all circled around her heart, eating away persistently at the shield she'd placed there long ago. And in the minutes that ticked by on the clock sitting on her nightstand, her lids grew heavier, staying closed longer each time she blinked. Her chest moved rhythmically with the beat of her heart even though there was a hollowness there that she'd been trying valiantly to push through. It ached so much the pain almost became unbearable, but only in the dark of night when she was in this bed alone. Throughout the day she'd had so much to do. Supplies to buy between her visits at the hospital. Cree was coming along. The bite at his side hadn't been too deep, and the doctors had stitched it up neatly without asking any questions. They did wonder a bit at the type of poison they'd found in his bloodstream, but had eventually chalked it up to a medical anomaly when neither Ravyn nor Shola offered any explanations. She could hardly tell the human doctor that the touch of a dampier carried a special type of poison, but was supremely grateful that the powerful antibiotics they'd pumped into Cree were working. Now, she just waited for the day they would release Cree to come home. His room had to be cleaned and prepped. Maybe new paint, and she'd see about getting him a real bedroom set. Nothing was too good for him, and nothing would replace the thoughts of Steele. Not for long anyway. On a sigh she rolled over onto her side, closing her eyes and vowing to keep them closed until morning when her music would click on to wake her, the same song that had awakened her the morning after Steele had been in her bed. But that wasn't meant to be. Regardless of what or who she really was, her place was at safe side. Her purpose in life was to help the people she knew had been wronged by a system she had no faith would ever change. Just as Steele had his purpose as a Drakon Dream Reaper, there were things neither of them could change, and first and foremost was the world they lived in. She wasn't part of his preternatural world. Even with her birthright, she had to stay at safe side to keep it running because Kree wanted to do more, to be more, and he deserved that opportunity. Her thoughts were like a whirlwind in her mind as she slipped into slumber, more than prepared for the rest. But what seemed like seconds later, her eyes opened slowly and she looked around into the dark night. Outside, a chilly wind blew as she walked down the street, her boots making a muffled sound on the pavement. She wore black jeans and a turtleneck, a leather jacket, and finger gloves on her hands. Where she was going, Ravyn had no idea. How she'd gotten here was also a bit baffling, until she saw him. He was leaning against a pole at the end of the street, a street that was very familiar to her now since it was the place where Temptra had taken Kree. The street where she'd pulled off the biggest robbery of her life and changed everything. His body was so buff the navy blue jacket he wore was almost too tight against the muscled arms and broad chest. Jeans had never looked as good on any guy as they did on Steele. Not tight, but fitting every part of his long, toned legs perfectly. Those sunglasses were back, even in the dark of night. The sight of them made her smile and walk a little faster. It had been 2 days since she'd seen him. That night in the cemetery was still fresh in her mind. After Steele had carried her and Kree to safety, she'd looked up to see him take his dragon form. Surprise had come soon after when she saw more of the winged beasts soaring through the sky and then the fiery arcs that came from their mouths that killed Temptra. It had all been so overwhelming, taking place as her best friend simultaneously almost bled to death in her arms. "I was wondering when I'd see you again," she said the moment she was close enough for Steele to hear her. He didn't move. Not to hug her, grab her shoulders and shake her for following him here. "Nothing. You shouldn't have come," he said in that tone that said he was both angry and conflicted. "I didn't have a choice." That was true. 1 minute she'd decided to go to sleep and the next she was here. No choice was presented, so she presumed none was to be made. And neither does he. This was a new voice. A cryptic-sounding one that had her leaning to the side to look past where Steele stood perfectly still. "I want you to leave," Steele told her. "Now. It is of no consequence. Dream Drakon. I will get what I came for." Steele turned quickly, opening his mouth to spew that vicious fire in the direction of a person or thing standing 10 feet behind it. That person or thing that had arms shaped like guns and wore metal shoulder pads, a dark hood and shakers on his feet. "You know your powers are useless on me," the man said. But realization hit Ravyn like a smack to the face. This was no man, it was the Reaper. And she was in Steele's dream. The dream where the Reaper had to collect the name on his list. She stepped around Steele then, so the Reaper could see her. He shook his hooded head. "No, not you this time. He betrayed me by leading me to another soul instead of yours, and then he let you take that dagger, which now protects you. For that, I will take him." "Go, Ravyn, now," Steele yelled. Was he serious? Did he really think she was going to leave him here? To die? Obviously. That's what was about to go down. Because the Reaper lifted one of his gun arms and bolts of lightning extended, reaching out like a hook to wrap around Steele's body and pull him forward. No, she screamed and reached for him, but something like a force field blocked her. The energy surge pushed her back on her ass and then shot her several blocks away, until all she could see were the flashes of light coming from the Reaper. White-hot pain seared through her chest and she gasped for air, rolling over on the ground as the pain racked her whole body. Her screams came so loud her eardrums were about to burst and every one of her bones felt as if they were cracking and caving in around her heart. "Leave," Steele yelled to her. "Just leave." She was shaking her head even though the word no would fall from her lips. Ravyn rolled over again, cursing the pain and vowing to break through. Coming up on her knees, she took a deep breath, crying out as even that caused pain. She didn't have to turn around to see that those lightning bolts were wrapped tight around Steele, squeezing the life out of him, because she felt every single tug and pull of them as if they were on her too. But she managed to reach her hand down to the dagger at her side, pulling it free and holding it until the warmth from the hilt began to slowly fill her body. It was like a glass of water being filled. From the bottom to the rim, power surged through her, bringing her head up first and then easing her into a standing position, turning her around until she could see clearly the Reaper killing the man she loved. Running came next, her legs moving so fast she barely felt them beneath her, then jumping high up into the sky until she landed behind the Reaper. "No," Steele yelled the second her feet touched the ground. "Ravyn, no, I wanted you to live. I needed you to live." His head tilted back, veins bulging in his neck as the Reaper continued his torture. "I loved you too much to let you die. What makes you think it would be any different for me?" She whispered and let his words wash over her, drawing even more power from them as she raised her arms. Both hands wrapped around the hilt of the dagger and brought it down to stab the Reaper in his back. The dagger went straight through him and she tumbled forward. "You can't kill me either," the Reaper said with an amused laugh. He circled his arms and pulled those lightning bolts tighter, until Steele's sunglasses fell to the ground and his Drakon's eyes glowed straight up to the sky. His feet were lifted up at that moment, the bolts twisting and turning him in the air, the life slipping out of him as he gasped for air. "Then I'll buy you," she said, and took tortuously slow steps until she was standing where the Reaper could see her. "Take it," she said and extended her arm to him. The dagger was in her hand and she turned it over, palm up so that he could see what she was offering. "If you can take life, wouldn't you want the power to make it remain dead? With this you can stop anyone from raising any lives you've taken." In the past couple of days, Shed learned a lot about the dagger that had come to her and her grandmother Bahati, the witch whose skills were incomparable and who'd lived in the Congo rainforest. She now knew of its great powers over the dead and the cursed. Steele had told her the dagger held her power, but he was wrong. It only enhanced what she was. Giving it up would take away some of the energy that made it possible for her to fight Temptra and probably to get here into Steele's dream. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered to her more than his life. And so she was offering it to the Reaper. "You cannot trick me." Witch's retort was strong and stung a little. Ravyn had been called a bitch a time or two in her life, but never had she been called a witch. And with such disdain, she was immediately offended. "Look, you can kill him and most likely bring forth the rage of every other dream Drakon across the realms, at which time I'm certain they'll exact their revenge by taking names off your list right and left. Or you can let him go and take this dagger to do with as you will." Steele was making a sound, like he was trying to say something, no doubt attempting to tell her to leave again, which was futile, but so like him to think he was still in control. But just in case he wasn't trying to talk, but was indeed dying right before her eyes, she took a step toward the Reaper and yelled, "Take it once more." The hood moved. He was considering the offer. She took another step, this time directly in front of one stream of the lightning he was using to strangle Steele, because the Reaper had said she was protected, right, and the dagger was technically still hers, until he accepted the offer. Her body effectively blocked that part of the lightning, but Steele continued to be trapped by the other. "I offer this to you in exchange for his life. I offer you this power." It wasn't a spell, even though Shed learned that those would come to her in time, but her words held power too, by virtue of her bloodline and its link to this dagger. What she said over it would be bound in magic. "You, witch, are a fool," the Reaper declared and shifted his aim so that the lightning bolt stretched out to grab the dagger and its sheath from her simultaneously. There was a loud thump and then the Reaper was gone as quickly as had come. And when Ravyn turned to look for Steele, he was gone too. Steele watched her sleep. For so many weeks had watched her doing things like walking down the street, sipping a cup of coffee, exercising at the gym and stealing. He couldn't forget the stealing. The thought had the corners of his mouth lifting into a grin. She was everything he'd never imagined would be within his reach. His beast had known that all along. It had been drawn to her immediately, knowing exactly what it needed to make them whole. Drakon selection was a real thing. A part of his human's mind had known that all along, which was probably why he'd felt such animosity toward Theo and Shola's pairing. Steele knew now that the past mistakes of Theo's mother had nothing to do with the Emperor and his new Empress. Theo's beast had made its selection regardless of the circumstances around them. Steele's beast had done the same. A warm swelling in his chest confirmed the beast's moment of glory, and Steele smiled again. Nothing but tender thoughts sifted through his human mind now. As the beast languished in victory and in love, Steele continued to stare at her. Long, dark hair spread out along her pillow. While the comforter rested so close to her nose, he wondered how she was able to breathe. But she was breathing. He'd felt it every second of every day for the 2 days he'd stayed away from her. Today was a new morning. It was a new beginning. Or at least he hoped it was. Otherwise, what was all the hell they just been through for? He knelt down beside her bed, reaching over to press the snooze button on her clock so the music wouldn't wake her as it did every morning. This time, he wanted to be the one to wake her. He wanted to be the first face she saw in the morning and the last face she saw at night. Had taken Theo's advice and thought long and hard about who he was and what his life would be moving forward. The resounding answer had been Ravyn. You, she whispered as she stared at him through one partially opened eye. You can't just fade in and out of someone's bedroom anytime you please. Her voice was music to his ears and the balm to his long-tortured soul. Steele touched a finger to the tip of her nose and then pushed the comforter down. Only your bedroom, Ravyn, and only ever to see you. Her smile was slow but still gut-wrenching as it spread, capturing him as if he weren't already entangled in her web. She reached up to cup his face in her hands. I thought you were gone, she said quietly. He leaned into her touch, turning his face slightly to kiss her palm. Not after some haughty witch made the Reaper an offer he couldn't refuse. That worked. I wasn't sure it would. I still don't know a lot about my power or the dreamscape. That is where we were. Right, plus, I'm still trying to figure out how I got there inside your dream. I mean, I think it was like you said. That dagger united us on a roof that night, and so you could hear when Temptra was whispering to me and I could drop in on your dreams. She stopped and shook her head. I'm still confused. Steele chuckled. I am too. But you know what? We can figure it out later. Right now, I just want to hold you. I just want to know that this is true and it's real. She lifted the comforter and sheet as an invitation for him to join her, and Steele stripped out of his clothes faster than had probably been able to fade here. He was climbing into bed with her in no time, gathering her in his arms and pulling her close. I love you so much, he whispered into her neck. I never wanted to love. Never wanted to connect again for fear of losing someone close. But I couldn't leave you. Not from day one. I knew I couldn't let you go. Her hands moved over his back as she hugged him close to her, fingers scraping over the scars he still had. The physical scars. Because her being with him had assuaged the emotional ones. That's because we're better together. Isn't that what you told me? Steele pulled back and looked into her eyes, filled with emotion and honesty and power. Yeah, that's what I said. So, it's a good thing I'm in love with you too, or else this might get awkward. He laughed and hugged her tight. Not awkward, but I'm sure now that we're together. Things are about to get very interesting. Chapter 18. 2 months later. This is an interesting setup you've got here, Rhys said as he walked through the double wood doors of the Safeside entrance on the corner of Frontvale Street. What are you doing here? Rhys can't find anything or anyone else to entertain you today, Ravyn asked after giving Rhys a hug. Rhys clutched his chest. You wound me with the assumption that I wouldn't be interested in helping out around here. Oh please. There aren't enough women here that will be flattered by your corny pickup lines and rugged good looks to keep you enthralled. She moved behind the front desk to gather up a stack of brochures and put them neatly into the holder. Rhys shrugged. You might be partially right. But I'm here to report for work, he said and looked over to Steele. Ravyn looked at him too, a brow lifted in question. Rhys is working here now. Sort of. Magnum's usually in charge of personal security, but he's traveling back to the Far Realm and then to Moba with Theo and Shola. So, Rhys is our point guy at Legion Security, he announced. Right. Since you've got my boy here working as your partner in this new shelter and rehabilitation venture. He's barely around at the office anymore, but I know he's hooked you up with a supreme security system. I'm here to assess what type of needs y'all have for on-site guards. We can also offer travel guards for whenever your clients come up from below and want to go out for job interviews, doctor's visits, etc. Rhys was now in work mode, his thoughts going to the needs of the client just as they'd all been trained. Steele listened and watched Ravyn to see what her reaction was going to be. When had suggested they add a formal entrance to Safeside on the streets of Burgess for others who might need assistance getting on their feet and remaining there, free of intimidation or prejudice. She'd been a little skeptical. Steele hadn't felt the least bit disrespectful by using Cree to tag team her into agreeing to the idea. We could use a few live security guards. I saw 2 enforcer cars riding by yesterday. They haven't ventured in here yet, but I'm sure they will soon, she said, and we'll be waiting when they do. Steele told her. The extortion and intimidation stop here. Before he left, Theo and I discussed developing a designated team of agents to investigate reports of interference from enforcers or politicians in the city, after Robla's death uncovered an extortion ring that reached all the way up to the governor's aides. There have been more reports. People aren't afraid to come forward now, Reese said with a nod. We can start with 2 armed guards at the entrance, 2 more down below at that secret entrance. 24 hours, 7 days a week. Cameras and wired windows and doors will help too. But I'm thinking those private guards will be needed as well, just in case. Steele agreed. During the construction of this part of the facility, which contained 25 guest rooms in addition to the newly renovated 20 rooms below, had been by her side every second of the day. They both realized that wasn't going to be possible forever, and even though she was coming into her powers as a witch, he still wanted her protected at all times. He wasn't totally sure the Reaper would leave them alone, much less whatever other evil entities might be swarming around out there. He had too much to protect now, too much to lose to let his guard down. But this time, they were doing this together, and for Steele that was all that mattered. Reviews are an invaluable tool when it comes to spreading the word about great reads. Please consider leaving an honest review for this, or any of Carina Press' other titles that you've read, on your favorite retailer or review site. He's sworn to protect the very entity she was born to kill. Keep reading for an excerpt of Awaken the Dragon, from A. C. Arthur. About the author. A. C. Arthur was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, where she currently resides with her husband, 3 children, grandson, and an English bulldog named Vader. An active imagination and a love for reading encouraged her to begin writing in high school, and she hasn't stopped since. Working in the legal field for over 25 years, A. C. has seen lots of horrific things and longs for the safe haven of a romance novel. To date, she has written in several genres of paranormal YA artist Arthur, small-town romance as Lacey Baker, and sexy contemporary and paranormal romance, with intriguing plots and sexy love scenes. A. C. brings a new edge to romance. Awaken the Dragon, by A. C. Arthur. Chapter 1. The glass doors to the building 10 feet away slid open slowly. That feeling, like a breeze lifting fall leaves off the ground, swirled in the pit of his stomach. Theo Masters eased off his bike and held the helmet between his arm and his hip as he continued to stare at that door. He considered removing his sunglasses since the sun had set hours ago, but decided against it. Seconds later, 3 women stepped out. His gaze fell quickly over each one, noting bare feet, long legs, and deep green material swaddling their bodies before stopping inches above the knees. Redan gold stripes slashed across their forehead and cheeks coupled with long gold spears held tightly in hand announced their warrior status, while his wish for a quick pickup and drop-off dwindled. The Odd Guard, or the River Guards. They were foot soldiers from the river tribe that lived in a village located along a portion of the Niger River, which flowed through western Nigeria. Theo had visited the area close to 100 years ago. 3 more women exited the building approximately 2 feet behind the first trio, and then 3 more, until 9 in total were now in a triple-file line in front of him. At some other time, in some other place, he might have been impressed. As it was now, their grand entrance was making his last-minute task take much longer than had anticipated. "You are the guardian we hired," the middle woman in the first row spoke to him, her voice loud, strong, and heavily accented. "I'm from the Legion Security Company." Even his voice sounded tired, deep and raspy, as it did when he woke in the mornings. In unison, each woman holding a spear clanked the metal ends to the ground. The tight formation parted with each of the sidelines stepping away so that only the woman standing directly in front of Theo, and another woman a few feet behind her, remained in the middle. "The ceremony is in 2 weeks. The accommodations are listed here, as well as the location for the ceremony, where you will deliver her safely. Joku Ngara and the River Tribe thank you for your services." Her words sounded rehearsed. With a crisp movement, she extended an arm in Theo's direction. A large white envelope was clutched between her fingers until he slipped it away. The woman stepped to the side, standing in line with the other guards, leaving only 1 woman in the middle. But this was no ordinary woman. Those leaves that had begun stirring in the pit of his stomach now swirled and twisted up into a funnel. His chest tightened, and his gums itched, as the beast within that had long lay dormant began to stir. Theo's fingers clenched into fists, the envelope crackling beneath his natural strength. She appeared ethereal, her silhouette wavering slightly as with the rhythm of the wind. Her eyes were like ice, clear white, but for the irises that were singular black dots. And she bore similar markings as the guards on her face. Only hers were all white. Atop her head was a golden diamond-encrusted crown that sparkled against the night backdrop. "You will transport me on that." Her voice was like the sun rising, glorious and breathtaking. It was also stabilizing. He caught the slow easing movement beneath his skin. With practiced strength, he pulled the beast back, his body once again still. He fixed his gaze on her. Only now that his vision had cleared, the woman standing in front of him looked different than she had just seconds ago. A rainbow of brown hues. The odd guard were different complexions, their hair either cut close to the scalp or twisted intricately. On the surface, the woman before him initially appeared different from the others. But now there was no crown and no markings on her face. Her skin was the deepest brown and hair a kinky mass circling her narrow face. All things easily noted by sight, but it was the languid stretch of muscles and tendons in his body that made the real point. "That is a bike. And yes, it will accommodate too." The tilt of one perfectly arched brow said she did not like the accommodations. That made two of them. And Magnum was going to feel his wrath first thing tomorrow morning. "I have seen a bike before. This is bigger, but not as big as a car." Which would have been more comfortable for such a trip? Not at all what she appeared. The thought played in his mind like a song on repeat, and his gaze eased over her once more. High cheekbones, her chin, reddish-brown eyes, and a muted-colored dress belted high at her waist. Just another client. Except there'd never been a client who clawed along his flesh with such urgent fervor before. Theo shook himself free of thoughts that had gone deeper than they should have and stepped forward. The odd guards took a quick, succinct step to close the space between them and her, but not enough to hinder her progression forward. She came toward him slowly. There was a change of plans. He snapped, edginess and annoyance now plaguing him. "I promised to get you to your hotel as quickly as possible." Each step she took felt as if she were already beside him, brushing slowly against the scaled skin of his beast. It was eerie, and yet comforting. "If you have luggage, I can send someone back for it. My things were sent ahead. They should be already at the hotel." Her voice, each word was spoken in a melodic tone, thick with her accent, yet as clear to him as his own dialect. "You can wear this. Then we should get going," he said, because this wasn't normal. Or at least the version of normal Theo knew humans accepted. He was 300 years old and came from the far realm. There was no doubt the people of Burgess, Pennsylvania, wouldn't find that normal at all. Still, there was something odd happening here, and he wasn't sure he liked whatever it was. He closed the small space shed left between them and resisted the urge to touch her cheeks where he knew those travel stripes had been before. Clenching his fingers on the helmet, he thrust it toward her and turned away, tucking the envelope inside his jacket. He moved to his bike and tossed a leg over the seat. His palms burned with the urge to touch, caress, explore. So he grabbed the handles. "Get on," shifting from just moments ago. His voice was now deep and stern, his mood decidedly darker even though he couldn't explain why. She hesitated. The odd guard also hesitated, looking ready to use those spears and whatever other defensive devices he was sure they had against him at any second. He didn't move, had been paid a hefty deposit for this 2-week assignment, and when it was over, his company would collect another large payment. It was a simple job: keep an eye on this woman until the day she would be delivered to her wedding. That was it. Even one of his lower-level agents could have done this. But as Theo watched her arms slowly lifting to settle the helmet over the poof of her hair, he knew that wasn't true. She was not just a bride. No ordinary bride required a personal escort like the odd guard, and no normal bride had a sole identity that looked like hers. She stepped closer to the bike, eyeing it suspiciously for a few seconds before letting her fingers tug the material of her dress up. She lifted her leg to cross over the seat. Theo started the engine. "Hold on. Just go." Her reply was curt, and she did not put a hand on him. With a shrug, he did what he was told, peeling off from the spot at a modest speed before picking up the moment they hit the open road. He had to hurry to get her to the hotel and in the hands of his other agents because the beast inside, the one that had lain dormant for the past 200 years, had awakened at the sight of her spirit. Theo didn't know why, nor did he care. All he knew was that this could not happen. Not here, indefinitely not now. The air was different here. Still warm, like at home, but rubbing along her face and bare arms with a sense of newness that almost made Shola smile. Almost. Instead, she sat with her back board straight behind this man who was hired to be her bodyguard for the next couple of weeks, as he rode fast through dark streets. In the distance, she could see light. So much light in an array of different colors amidst the near black backdrop. There were tall buildings in that distance. A city. A place she had never been before. Her home was nestled along the river, in a small village full of Yoruba people who looked and spoke like her. They were the reason she was here. The reason that she lived. Shola rested her fingers on her thighs. She sucked in this new and different air, releasing it slowly through partially parted lips. Glancing down at the material of her dress bunched between her legs, her bare knees pointing outward toward the night, filled her with a weird yearning. It was an odd position to be in with a stranger, one that caused a rush of warmth to spread throughout her body. That was new as well. So many new things in such a short span of time. The dress was ridiculous. She had known that the moment her mother brought it into her bedroom. It is proper attire for where you will be going, Ejeda told her only child. There will be other ceremonial preparations you will experience once you arrive in the Western world. Your Baba and I will arrive the night before the wedding. Like Shola, her parents had never been anywhere else in the world. They were part of the river tribe and had no intention of being anything else. She was only one of a couple hundred in their village who had received an education in African and Western studies. So she knew of some things that she would find here in this world and of the basic meaning of this union between her and Warwick Camden. As long as it meant her people would live safely on their land forever. Shola was up for learning more. She was ready to do more. Your Baba and I are very proud of you, Shola. We know you will make an excellent wife. And we are very happy for you, Ejeda continued. The tears that welled in her mother's eyes were a direct contradiction to her words. While her parents had always been proud of her educational achievements and when she became a teacher, Shola knew they were not happy about this arrangement. No one in the village was happy the day that Warwick appeared and made his pronouncement. It is what is meant to be, she had replied to her mother. Because it was the truth. She was promised to this marriage before she was born. And now it was time to live up to that agreement. Now, riding through the streets of this new city, she told herself she was closer to the time she had waited for her entire life. We're almost there, the bodyguard yelled over his shoulder. His very big, squared shoulder. The man was huge, tall, broad and more ominous than any of the warriors she had seen back home. She had noted that the moment Monif, general of the odd guard, had stepped out of the way and Shola had her first glimpse of him. Head stood in front of a large and imposing bike, which seemed to match the rider as he was over 6 feet tall and easily 250 pounds. Jeans covered muscled thighs, and a fitting t-shirt stretched over a broad and formidable chest like one of the shields designed for the odd guard. His skin was a much lighter tone than hers, almost the color of straw, and his hair was dark and curled tightly to his scalp. Thank you. It seemed like the right thing to say even though he had only used a gruff tone with her since their meeting. He was doing her a service for which she should be grateful. She did not know her way around this place called Burgess, nor did she know where the wedding or any of the other ceremonial events would take place. Monif had given this bodyguard the envelope with all that information. She did not mind not knowing the details. All that mattered was what she was sent here to do. The bodyguard leaned slightly to the side as he turned the bike around a corner, and they rode down a narrow street. Buildings stood on each side of the street, clubs of some sort. She could tell by the signs above the entrances and the names that these weren't clubs she would ever frequent. Ballers. Twilight, siren and swing time were lit up like Christmas trees. Lines of people outside each door. Cars pulling up on the street adding more people to the crowd. The bodyguard drove straight through. Noise was all around. Vehicles whizzing by. Music blasting from one place to the next. People laughing and talking. And the wind. A low hum like a pulse against all the commotion. She focused on the wind. How it felt warm against her skin. The way it pounded rhythmically in her ears. Steady. Intentional. Warning. She looked from one side of the street to the other, counting the people on each side, watching the steps they took, the way they appeared to fly by in a blur as the bodyguard drove faster. Demonic laughter came in those moments, amidst the sound of the music and the bike's engine. A quick eerie chuckle that told her they were coming. Demonics with long gangly legs stepped out of the line at the last club the bodyguard passed. They were dressed in jeans, t-shirts and tennis shoes, like everyone else waiting to get into the various buildings. But they were not the same. Their golden skin and orange eyes set them apart. The loud screech they made in the seconds it took them to break into a run and propel themselves through the air until they landed in front of the bodyguard's bike. An alarming confirmation. The bodyguard brought the bike to a quick stop that should have jolted them out of the seat, but neither moved. 6 demonics stood in front of the bike, forming a line that would prohibit the bike's passage. The bodyguard moved his neck to one side until it cracked and repeated the action in the other direction. She drummed her fingers on her thighs, shifting her eyes from one demonic to the next, and then the next. Thoughts of how to protect them rolled quickly through her mind. She had been warned of the demonic presence in the world, but had not seen any up close back home. The Western world was very different from her secluded village. She was getting an early glimpse of just how much. Listen to me closely, the bodyguard said. I'm going to get off this bike, and when I do, I want you to run into that building to my right. She saw the building less than 10 feet away, but she had no plans to run. Do you understand? His tone was condescending and instantly annoyed her. But now was neither the time nor place for her to address that. She did not get a chance to offer a pleasant retort either, because the demonic in the center of the line lifted his hands to show blue rays of light shooting from each finger, when the other demonics lifted their hands to send streaks of blue light filtering through the air. The bodyguard cursed. Power pulsed through Shola's veins as training scenarios played in her mind. This was not her job, not what she had been sent here for, but something needed to be done, or she would never make it to fulfill her destiny. With moves that were faster than the light cutting through the air, the bodyguard kicked one demonic until it dropped to the ground. He never looked behind, but reached an arm back to punch the next demonic coming for him. Then he pulled a dagger from the back of his pants and stabbed the first demonic in the center of its chest. It disappeared in a puff of blue smoke. The next one, bold enough to approach him from behind, caught the dagger in the throat, his body also going poof. Although he fought like a highly trained warrior dressed in all black, his body whisking through the night in powerful motions, she didn't believe he could stop the demonics. Not by simply using hand-to-hand combat. She had to do something. Her mind centered on the earth and all that surrounded it before she slowly lifted her arms to call for the wind. It tickled along the line of her fingers, easing up toward the tip where it stung with urgency to be released. Wiggling her fingers sent the air around them into a frenzy. Paper from gutters rose to twirl on the breeze. Windows on all the buildings rattled and a soft whistle shot through the night. The blustery air threw the remaining demonics off balance while the bodyguard continued to pounce and strike them down as they tried to attack on wobbly legs. With each swing of his dagger, blue smoke swirled into the whistling wind, and when they were all gone, she dropped her arms to her side just as the bodyguard turned to face her. I told you to get inside the building, did you not understand that? Again with that irritating tone. Either he thought she was an idiot or that she could not decipher English, which was silly because she had spoken to him before she climbed onto his bike. It didn't matter, and she wasn't going to reply to his rudeness. He didn't seem to care because he stalked past her to his bike, kicking the stand that held the bike up.